At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cupp, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
Hello and welcome today. This is Hear Her Sports, the female athlete podcast for everyone who loves stories by and about women. I am your host, Elizabeth Emery. In each episode, I introduce a female athlete or a woman in the business of sport. I talk to women from all over and from lots of different sports. They share what they've learned from sport, tips that you and I can use in our own training and our regular lives. Today, I am talking to Danette Leighton, the CEO of Women's Sports Foundation. The Women's Sports Foundation is an incredible and vital organization for women's sports. It was founded in 1974 by the great Billie Jean King. Imagine that, founded in 1974. That is more than 50 years ago, only 2 years after the passing of Title IX. Before joining Women's Sports Foundation in 2022, Danette had an illustrious 12-year career with the Pac-12 Conference, most recently as their Chief Marketing Officer. And prior to that, she was with Maloof Sports and Entertainment's NBA Sacramento Kings as VP of Marketing and Brand Development, plus also the VP of Business Operations for the WNBA Monarchs. She also previously worked for Sony and managed their sponsorship of the PGA Tour's Sony Open in Hawaii and was Stanford University's Executive Director of the 1999 NCAA Women's Final Four. Danette and I spoke mid-March, just before this year's Final Four weekend in Tampa, so we talked about basketball and growth of women's sports through the lens of Final Four tournaments the past couple years. We also discussed media, momentum, and fans, but what I love most about having this opportunity to talk with Danette is getting her big picture view of what's happening in women's sports and the history behind where we are now. A big takeaway for all of us is that Danette and I would not be having this conversation without Title IX. That legislation, protecting it, and continuing to educate new generations about it is so important. I am a longtime fan of the Women's Sports Foundation and certainly knew of Danette. I met her in person when she was in Cleveland last year for the Final Four. She participated in a superb panel. A link to watch that is in the show notes. It is an honor to have Danette Leighton on the show, so let's get to it.
I'm ready when you are.
All right. Well, Danette, it is so terrific to have you here on Hear Her Sports. I mean, I really appreciate your time. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm super excited because I still remember so fondly the panel that you were on in Cleveland, Ohio during the Final Four last year. It was actually one of the best gatherings of just amazing, incredible women saying incredible things that I've ever attended. So thank you for that. And I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad you were there with us. I'm getting excited and ready to go to this year's Women's Final Four in Tampa.
Well, I was just going to say that, like here we are again during the Final Four time. This must be so exciting for you just because, watching the growth of women's collegiate basketball and the WNBA, particularly since you were involved with the Monarchs, a former WNBA team, but also, certainly as the CEO of Women's Sports Foundation.
It is. And, if you take it way back, I don't like saying this because I was 12 when I did this. Women's basketball is obviously very near and dear to my heart. But in 1999, I ran the Women's Final Four at San Jose for Stanford. Stanford was the host. And I always say it was the job that was the catalyst to my career. And now looking back and knowing how many Women's Final Fours I've attended, how much I've been a part of the sport from my obviously collegiate days of working on campuses, plus as the Pac-12, running a WNBA franchise. It's and now being in this role, it's definitely been a sweet journey to see and watch, especially through the lens of one sport.
That must be cool to sort of be able to look back what it was like I'll say way back then and now. I mean, it's so different.
It's so different. And I think that's what's so exciting. We thought we were doing great things in 1999, obviously, but I think, what I'm so excited to see and have watched is just the momentum. And it is such, being able to go to Cleveland and seeing Tampa this year, not just what happens in the building, but what I get most excited about are all the things that are happening outside of the building. For many, many years, you did not see all of those adjacent events and promotions and multiple brands wanting to be a part of the conversation or host their own individual events, or all the different media companies that are now really dedicated to women's sports. So I think when you have all of that happening at this championships, not to mention the quality of play, which is where it all starts, it just shows you how far we've come, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, of course, and we're going to talk about all of those things. That was one thing that struck me in Cleveland, was just how much stuff, as you said, that was sort of outside of the courts, and how I'm going to say how, just how the city embraced having the Final Four there was incredible.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing, I can say over the last, especially 5 to 8 years, and even probably longer than that, those host cities that are, making sure that they put on a great experience, not only for the fans, but for wanting to bring championships back. Tampa will do the exact same thing. They're a phenomenal city for major championships. I know Phoenix will, those that'll be running the Phoenix Women's Final Four will also be in Tampa looking at it. And they've run phenomenal events from the Super Bowl, all, to the men's Final Four. So I just think we have some really remarkable cities that have taken, really understood the power of women's sports. So I'm excited about this year in Tampa. I'm excited about Phoenix next year. And there's a lot of markets. I know for me personally, being a West Coaster, I want to see more and more West Coast cities take advantage of great women's championships.
One of the things that I wonder is if having something like the Final Four, the Women's Final Four, does that show the city, the citizens of the city, how great women's sports can be?
I think it's definitely a factor. I think everybody comes into their fandom in different ways, right? And I think, we always like to say at the Women's Sports Foundation, none of this is a coincidence. It's taken 5 decades to change gender norms and be able to see both men and women who have been growing up with watching women and men play sports. We think that's a really important factor to all of this excitement. It's not just something that happened overnight. It's taken decades for us to obviously have a piece of legislation that continues to be our pride and joy as it relates to protecting that legislation. But none of this would be happening without that. It's just as important for boys and girls to grow up with women playing sports. And I think the collegiate excitement around March Madness for the men has been there for so long that it's really been fun to watch that excitement continue to just grow and build and get even more on the women's side. And I think that's what you're seeing now, and you're seeing these cities recognize, what a great championship it is to host. And I think you're also seeing that in a lot of the launching of different franchises in the professional women's leagues as well, whether that be the WNBA, the NWSL, et cetera. The interest and investment in women's sports has never been stronger. At the same time, there's lots of hurdles that we need to make sure we can get through and make sure all people recognize that there are work that needs to be done. But I think obviously leaning in hard to champions like this, and if you're so lucky to get a ticket now or have the ability to be a part of any of the ancillary events, we highly encourage it, especially if you're living down in Tampa, because I don't think you'll regret it.
Yeah, super fun. You mentioned a word that I'm really curious about and have been hearing over and over again, momentum. What does that mean to you in this context, of course? What's happening, why did it happen, or anything that you want to talk about? I think that the word I find very fascinating.
Yeah, well, it's people want to say momentum or movement, but I do think, it's a multiple things. It's not just one thing. And I think that's really important to understand, is that what's been happening in women's sports isn't a coincidence, as I just shared. Mm-hmm. It is truly the work of 5 decades of Title IX, and both men and women growing up with it, playing it, the future leaders that obviously come out of sport participation are now some of the investors, whether they be working for brands or others. I like to give examples that a lot of people don't recognize. I use Andrea Brimmer is one of my best examples. Andrea Brimmer was a Division I soccer player at Michigan State. She's the CMO of Ally Bank. We all know a lot of the work that they've been doing in wanting to showcase that equal type of investment from an advertising standpoint. There's a lot of examples of both men and women executives that are now leading the charge and making those decisions, have all either hopefully played sports, which is a lot of them, and it doesn't matter how far they went. Even playing at the college level is really hard to play at. But most importantly, they've grown up with it. And we think that is really making a big difference now. I think this product, overall, women's sports as a product, has been underinvested in for decades at all levels. And I think women's sports has gotten to where it's gotten today with one arm tied behind their back. And now we have this opportunity to continue to see and get more people entering the space. And I like to say, welcome to the women's sports party. There's plenty of room at the table. But I think that's really changed over the last 3 to 5 years, because I also think the places in which women are able to be seen has also transformed, and the distribution or the disruption in the media space has been a big component of that. The days are gone that you live under a 24/7 linear network where you only have a certain amount of windows to watch these athletes play or to get these different types of media deals. Now there's multiple places in which you can watch these remarkable sports and athletes, in addition to just women and female athletes being, control of their own brands and being able to be influencers themselves and being able to be relatable. Those types of things didn't exist even when I ran a Dip and Bay franchise, which now feels like forever ago. So I think all of these factors matter, but it's momentum that has taken time that we now want to see continue.
What are your thoughts about mainstream media and mainstream investors getting on board? Because as you said, there are all of these other avenues to watch sports and to follow the athletes. And some of the major drivers of current interest in women's sports are athlete-driven engagement and digital coverage. So what do you think about the mainstream media and how important that is to be covering women's sports?
I think all of it's incredibly important. And I think we have had some mainstream media that have been in the space for a while and have covered women's sports for a while. But again, you have a certain amount of windows in how media used to be distributed, right? Which is also changing for all of those longstanding media companies, which has allowed for more opportunities. I'm a former CMO, so I care about reach and frequency. The more reach you can get, the more frequency you can get, the more people that are engaged in seeing this, not only as a fan, but the more people want to consume it, and also allows for the whole kind of business model to be enhanced. We know how important media rights deals are to teams, leagues, properties. We know it's a big component to the overall kind of business model. We know that impacts what players are paid and other things. So it's really, really important that there's that competitive landscape to allow for those, very important metrics that have been a part of the sports ecosystem for a long time to continue to be, to evolve and enhanced for women's sports, because it will only create stronger, bigger valuations of teams and leagues. And also, I think really important for the investment to be done, more at the collegiate level, very intentionally, so that these sports have the ability, both women's sports and men's Olympic sports, have the ability to stand on their own 2 feet, but also be another product that's worthwhile to invest in, which they are, to also be a potential revenue driver for the institutions. And I think all of these things are possible. And really, women's sports is a startup that has been around for 51 years or 53 years. We're 51. And it hasn't really been invested in at the level that you would normally invest in a startup or a product that hasn't really even been proven yet. I kind of giggle with women's sports. Well, we've been proving the model for 53 years. I mean,
Right.
What a smart business decision to invest and engage. But I think all this disruption, I think, the strength of our athletes, I think all of these remarkable leagues and teams, and I think both men and women play a massive role in this. This isn't just, something for women to get behind. This is something for our entire society to get behind. And I think that's what's exciting about it.
I do agree with you. However, I love seeing former professional athletes investing in current teams. I think that, to me, that is super exciting.
Well, I can say we probably have the most iconic one of all that's been doing it for decades, and that's Billie Jean King and her wife,
Yes.
Lana Klaus. So they've seen this pattern for a very long time. And I think for people like them that have, been beating the drum, I think it's obviously an exciting time for all of us to see. But again, we're just scratching the surface on that level of investment. And I think there's so many opportunities, and we want to make sure that those that want to engage at whatever level, not just the, what everybody's talking about, which is the teams and the leagues, but all the adjacent sides of sport, which I think are really important, from merchandising to how the whole kind of model works. And I think that's what you're also I get excited about seeing all those adjacencies at the women's Final Four, like we talked about. That didn't occur in 1999. You didn't
Right.
see all of that because you didn't have those opportunities. Now you can see more and more businesses, more and more kind of levers being pulled that aren't just in the traditional form, but all kind of the sports adjacencies, which I think are fantastic for women's sports.
Billie Jean King has always looked so forward thinking, but like as time passes, she looks even more forward thinking.
That is how Billie Jean King thinks on a daily basis. I will tell you, obviously I feel incredibly lucky to have, to be able to work with and for Billie and a great board that we have at the Women's Sports Foundation. But she's been a visionary since the day she disrupted, her time in tennis. And she has seen this pathway, and she continues to be driven that way. I always like to say I want to be Billie when I'm her age. Right now, she runs circles around all of us, and she's going to continue to do that. She has always seen the big picture, and she has always done it for people that come, after her. She's never done it for herself. And I think that's something that, for all of us who have had the pleasure of working in sports, recognize that, no matter what level we might have played women's sports, that Billie never did it for her. She did it for everybody that came after her. And it's important for us to carry that torch and pass that baton back every generation. And I think that's what's driven me so much in this role.
I think about how brave the steps that she took were. I mean, just think about when she was doing that.
Incredibly courageous. And I think
Yes.
that's the one thing that, everything, it's an interesting thing. A lot of people ask the question to me, well, so few people get to be able to participate or play at a collegiate or Olympic or a professional level. But the real importance that, we focus in on, and what Billie really saw, is it doesn't matter what level of sport you play at as a girl or a woman. It's just a matter of playing. We want you to play as long as possible. And when you do play, all of the benefits and intangibles that come from playing benefit your life, and particularly benefit you in the leadership arena. And I think that is something that we see. And I know for myself, I was never an elite athlete, but I know the intangibles I learned from playing youth softball and flag football in college and intramurals made me the person that I am today, and made me the professional that I am today, because I learned all of those critical intangibles. And we want all girls and boys to have that same opportunity. And this is also an example of 5 decades having that ability to see that transformation, and actually seeing the results of those individuals, no matter what they're doing in their life, which most of them never go on to be those elite athletes. They go on to be the next leader in society, which is why it's so important for us, for girls, women, to have equal opportunity to play.
Well, that is a great segue to the Play to Lead study that you guys did, the Women's Sports Foundation. So let's talk about that, because that's the thrust of our conversation today. Could you just introduce that study, that research?
Sure. So obviously last year was our 50th anniversary, and it was really important for us to look at research kind of on two different areas that we have recognized for decades that sport really enhances girls' and women's lives. One was obviously from a preventative health perspective, both from a physical and mental health perspective. We did a research study that was called Thriving Through Sport, which showed that when girls and women play sports, they're less likely to have anxiety and depression to the girls that do not, which many of us understand. When you play in the right environment, it is a stepping stone to better mental and physical health. So that was one of our studies that we really thought was important to have out there in our 50th anniversary. And the other one was our Playing to Lead study. And most of us all know the Ernst & Young study that was done a while back that shares that 94% of C-suite women played sports, with over half of them playing in college. Well, we knew that there was this correlation, or we assumed there was this correlation, which is why we wanted to do the research, that it didn't really matter what level of play you played at. The intangibles and the benefits that you learned from sport are real. And so we wanted to focus on a cross-generational look and research report that showed women from their 20s to their 80s, obviously all based on where they are in their journey and their careers, which we all know are very different based on where you are kind of in your life cycle, to see if indeed just youth sport participation made an impact on their leadership. And it was great to see, and not surprising, that 71% of the women believe that their sport participation, all of them were either on this trajectory of managers, directors, vice presidents, C-suite, doctors, lawyers, you name it. And, to see a 71% number didn't surprise us, but it also really showed how it really manifests across different generations, but manifests where you are in your life cycle of leadership. And those intangibles, I think many of us know just innately who played sports. Those intangibles are grit, resilience, teamwork, collaboration, better communication, competitiveness, decision making, all of the things that you use in life and in business. And I know for me, I didn't learn those in the classroom. I learned those from playing sport. And those are the most incredible intangibles that we try to really push and promote, to make people understand why it's so important for girls and women to have access to playing sport and to play sport for as long as possible. And you never have to go be an Olympian, because very few of us ever get that opportunity.
There's so much of the study that excited me, but one of the biggest things was just having the proof that sports is more than just sports. I mean, as you said, we heard that study about 94% of C-suite women played sports, but this is so much more tangible. And as you mentioned in the introduction, that it covers, such a wide age bracket, and also covers the people that were just playing youth sports. And the benefits and impact, they just go so far beyond the playing field.
It's exactly why it was so important for us to do a study like that, and for those to continue to be educated on it. For those parents that are questioning on whether or not, their daughter should be playing sports and why it's so important. There's other great assets to it as well. Most people don't understand that girls do better academically. They are more likely to be involved in more extracurricular. It's just the power of sport is so significant. And that's why we like to say sports should not be considered an extracurricular and should not be considered a nice to have. It is something that's a must have for everyone, boys and girls, which is why we want to make sure girls and women have that equal access. And I think that's what's been so powerful in this country, with a policy that has allowed us to look back at it after its, creation and implementation. And now we want to say this is a great example of the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, and policymakers, working together on something that's been working. We need to make sure that it's complied with, and there's a lot of obviously challenges in different areas. But the reality is it's a great example of something that's really benefited not just our society at large, but our economy. Like, you literally are breeding the future leaders when you play sports.
Talk about how Title IX fits into this. And I was particularly interested because, as I said, there was such a wide age bracket of the people that you researched, you did the research with.
Yeah, so obviously, as we all know, Gen X is the first generation that's lived its full life with Title IX. So that's my generation. But if you were generations like Billy's generation, like, you didn't have the access to playing sports in your educational system the way that I had the access to playing sports in my educational system. So therefore, you had a lot more reduced opportunities. And over time, what you've seen is, because of this legislation and because it's been tied to our education system, obviously, girls have had more and more opportunities to be able to play sports well before they were ever allowed to. Like, if you have any conversation with women that are, in their 80s, they had very limited opportunities, and they were not within, for the most part, their school systems or teams and leagues that were a part of it. And so you're just seeing the domino effect of generations of that access and more opportunities being developed. And I also then tie it back to, it's not a surprise that you're seeing women's sports through this business lens and investment lens. It's all tied together. And for anybody to not think that it's tied together, that's just silly. Like, it's because we've had a powerful piece of legislation that has proven itself and has taken decades to change the norms and to make sure that both girls and boys have equal opportunity to playing sports. And we're not even equal yet. That's the irony. So I think it's just shows the importance that without that legislation, I don't think we'd be sitting here in 2025 with having this conversation about the women's Final Four being as strong as it is, having all these leagues. Like, we would not be having that without the piece of legislation that started it all.
So what's next for you guys, and particularly given what you've learned from this study and being able to see the impact of the legislation, the Title IX?
Well, obviously for us, one of our primary objectives is to protect legislation like Title IX, but continue to prove why it's important, just like these two research studies did. We have to always prove, to a lot of people to understand why sports shouldn't be seen as an extracurricular and what it does for girls and women's health and what it does for girls and women's leadership, which therefore what it does for girls and women and just the overall economy. And again, it's just the same as what it does for boys. We want both boys and girls to have the opportunity to play sports at all levels. And we know that requires support within our educational system to make sure those programs don't get cut. Those programs have the ability to thrive. So as much as I would like to tell you how I love that we have this piece of legislation, it's not always just left up to the legislation. Obviously, economics matter. The reality of funding matters. Looking at different challenges of just the lack of compliance that continues to be there. I like to remind people that as much progress as we've made, girls' high school participation is exactly where the boys were in 1972.
Oh my
So
goodness.
we have, I'm thrilled that we've made progress, but as Billy, knew a long time ago, it's just still much more to do. And there's obviously lots of threats and challenges and concerns about that access going away. As more challenges with what's happening economically and making sure that again we don't want, I'm sure it's the same in how people in both the sports and the arts field work. We've always been seen as this extra, and you shouldn't be seeing this as an extra. It needs to really be a part of the full landscape so that every boy and girl has access to playing sports, no matter within your school system, no matter if you have it in your youth sports clubs and communities, making sure all those high schools continue to have opportunities for both boys and girls to play at their level. And then obviously making sure the collegiate side of the house, which is an area that we're very worried about, doesn't start to reduce those opportunities for both men and women at the Olympic level, where there are lots of different divisions, not just Division One. There's Division 1, 2, 3, NIIA, and we know that opportunity is also a big reason why a lot of women have the ability to go to college and earn their degrees. So there's so many components to areas that need to continue to be worked on, and we want to continue to prove the model through our research and our advocacy, but making sure that we're paying attention and looking at every component of the women's sports ecosystem. And that for us is obviously the youth level, the high school and collegiate level, and the elite side. I'm thrilled that all this conversation is around the elite side and the investment and everything that you're seeing, but you don't want the pipeline to break. And so you need to make sure you pay attention to the whole ecosystem. And that starts at the very beginning of that access and that pipeline for girls to have that opportunity to play at the youngest levels.
Can we talk about public school, sports in public school? I mean, from my perspective, it just seems like there's not much there anymore. I mean, what can be done about that?
Well, I think it's, again, I think it's important for organizations like ourselves and just everyone in their own communities, parents and teachers and everyone to understand that this is something that is very powerful for your communities and you want to make sure you support it. A lot of people ask me, well, what can I do and how can I do more? And people are so surprised that you can do some really fundamental things within your own community in which you live. And it's important to support your local middle school and high school girls programs. It's not only as a fan, but also in investing in them. It's important for you to make sure that the schools in which your kids are going to school comply with Title IX and are giving those opportunities for both girls and boys to have that equal opportunity. It's being educated and understanding the power of sport is so much bigger than extracurricular. So I think all of us can play a significant role within our own communities. And I think it's also important for those parents to understand that the high school system, as much as the youth system, sometimes we like to say the youth system has gotten a little too much pay to play. So don't take away opportunities at the high school levels and the middle school levels, because for some communities, that's the only place they can play because they can't afford to start being in the club system. So it's really important for everyone to participate in making sure that those offerings are there. And if you are so lucky to have that child that is excelling at the youth level and is playing all those club sports, make sure that they still are participating within their high school sports, because for some people, based on their socioeconomic backgrounds, is the only place that they have a chance to play. We don't want this to be something that is only for the haves, and ends up being something that is obviously a socioeconomic opportunity only. It needs to be something that everyone has the ability to play, because that's what makes sports so great. It is such a microcosm of society, and it is such a great example of breaking down so many barriers. And who I always remind people, like, sports is always about community and fun. So it's still something that everybody can be a part of. And we just are hopeful that everyone's educated and understanding the impact that they can make even in their own communities, and making sure that some of the most basic fundamentals of complying with legislation like Title IX at the local levels, or supporting in, whether it's your high school team or you are lucky enough to have a professional women's team there, buy a ticket, buy a jersey, invest in your girls and women's sports. It's important. And the other piece is coach. We need more women coaching girls teams. And we really, really, really encourage more women to take that opportunity to coach in their own communities.
Tell me more about that. Like, how would somebody get involved in being a coach if, they've never done it before?
I think this is when there's so many great, there obviously are absolutely great different programs. Like the Positive Coaching Alliance is a great organization as it relates to looking at the ability to learn the right way and coach the right way and get engaged. But I think we all know, as a mother of a daughter who played sports, and she chose not to play the sport that I played, you just have to be courageous enough to recognize that you can coach anything. Just there's skills, and there's education, and there's training, and there's organizations in every community. We just know through our own data that when girls, obviously, if you can see her, you can be her. And in a lot of communities, there's just a continuous decline of women coaching girls. And we want to see more of that, just like we want to see more women coaching boys. So I think it's just an opportunity for us to, again, continue to break down barriers, and everyone can have the opportunity to coach at the youth level just by putting themselves out there.
So just to confirm, you're saying that people should just show up and hope for the best. I mean, I don't mean to. I don't mean to say that.
Yeah, I don't think people realize. I think a lot of the barriers is maybe a woman doesn't think that they can coach something, and you can get the training and the teaching no matter where you are in your community to learn something. I think sometimes, and I'm not exactly sure why, I don't have the data behind it, but a lot more women choose not to coach. And whereas you may not think, you don't need to check every box. It's kind of like when you apply for a job, there are differences, right? We seem to think that we have to check every single box to coach, or every single box to apply for a job. I think there's a lot of similarities there. There's tons of resources to be taught how to coach appropriately. And we have an amazing amount of resources within our organization. We have a free digital platform that's called We Play Interactive for any coach that wants to see it through a research and scientific lens of how coaching girls is different than coaching boys. I mean, there's resources everywhere, but you have to put yourself out there. And I think that's some challenges that women have in different parts of, applying for a job or not thinking that they can coach a team. You can't. It's not that hard.
Well, I think we also have to remember that, kids playing youth sports are not pros.
I think, yeah, I'm not talking about becoming a Division I women's basketball coach.
Right.
I'm talking about coaching your 6-year-old daughter on her first soccer team. I think it's, again, looking at it through that lens. It's not looking at it through the lens of this is your professional career. Although we do need more women coaching at those levels as well. It's just making sure that within your own community, it's a way that you can give back. And it's something that we would encourage all women to do.
I also think that people underestimate, and I say this a lot, that people underestimate the value of representation. Just sort of the impact of that is just incredibly extreme.
And that's what our research shows us, and in so many reports that we've done. Representation matters. If you can see her, you can be her matters. And that's why we think it's really important for more and more women to coach girls. And we want to see more and more women coach boys.
Yes, for sure. Did you guys learn anything in this study about adult women who continue to play sports? I mean, because fewer adult women than adult men do that.
Well, this study definitely focused in on youth sport participation.
Right.
But obviously, what we have seen through the many years this organization's been in existence and doing research is that women that play at obviously in their youth levels are more likely to continue to play, later in life. But whether that sport is a team sport or turns out to just being more physically fit, or they pivot into something else as you obviously continue to go on your journey of life, that early sport participation usually is a starting point for that type of a journey.
Are you still active?
I am. I hike. I'm a hiker.
Great.
So do I play pickleball? Do I play tennis? Do I play flag football anymore? No. But I like to hike. That's kind of that's what I enjoy doing. It's my mental and physical escape.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the future. I know we've talked about it, but what are you looking to do like in the next year or maybe next 5 years, however you want to answer that?
Well, I think, we continue to see both the positives of what are happening and obviously all the excitement that we just talked about around women's sports, but we also see all the threats. And so we're paying attention to those threats at each level of the ecosystem, and they all vary depending. I kind of talked about them broadly in the last answer, but I think it's really important to know that there is an organization that is constantly looking at policy, recognizing where we have challenges, understanding what, are the different nuances in each of the different layers of the ecosystem, and our reminder to everybody how it's all connected together. And so that is the type of work that we do both in our research, looking at the next kind of lens of what is the next needed research that we need to be able to put out there, looking at it through the lens of policy and transparency, looking at it through protection of legislation like Title IX and making sure it's complied with. So there's layers and layers of what we recognize need to continue to be done. And our focus will always be to make sure that we're that organization that connects all those dots and then does the work through our research and advocacy to prove the model, but to actually have the type of community impact programs that we do have always been a proof point of our research and advocacy so that we can, create best practices. But it really is important for us to make sure that the entire, not just women's sports community, but the entire communities across the country and across the globe understand and recognize the power of sport and are educated on this type of information that we do on the daily, because it's not a guarantee.
Two things that I thought of while you were talking was, one, I'm always surprised at how few people know Title IX. And then the other thing was, in the study, I was struck by how it mentioned that this was not simply for the elite athlete or the superstar leader. It was for basically everyday people.
I think that's the one part that as every generation passed and we talk about all the positives of women's sports, the up and coming generations don't realize that they have this opportunity because of a piece of legislation. So that's why one thing for us that's really important is to beat the drum on educating people on this legislation and why they have the life that they have and the importance of it, and that it didn't just happen. And you have to protect legislation like Title IX so that it can continue to do the great work that it's doing. But to also be able to do research like we've done that really shows the economic impact that happens when girls play sports. For me, when you are essentially a part of breeding the next or training the next leaders through sport participation, and it isn't just about being in the vertical of the sports business, it's in every vertical of business. I think that's what's super fun to see today, and why you're seeing a lot of the momentum on the investment side is women are in executive roles of leadership around every sector of business. And that is, a lot of that is an example of their experience of playing a sport. And so for us, it doesn't matter. And most people never go on to play at the highest level. It's just that you played. You learn the intangibles. Right. And that's what we want to make sure girls continue to have access, and boys.
Yeah. And most people don't end up being the CEO of a company,
Exactly.
But they still are leading.
Matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter. So continuous education, and also for every generation that, I would like to say comes behind me and my daughter, like my daughter's generation, like all of them need to be educated on the work that the generation of Billie Jean and others did, because we wouldn't be sitting here without that. And There's a lot of things that even for myself coming into this role that I didn't even know, and I worked in sports my whole life. So I think it's really important for all the listeners and everyone that enjoys watching or been a part of any form of a sport participation to understand that this is because of Title IX.
Right. Can we talk quickly about fans? Who are they now? Fans of women's sports. Who are they now? Do you have a sense of, the demographics, I guess?
Well, I think there's tons of research out here that you're starting to see a lot more from different entities, which is great, that have entered the business side of women's sports, whether it be the Wasserman Collective has done some great research on this and others. But I think the best part about fandom is that it continues to grow and continues to change. So you have fans that are demographically, they're, both genders, men and women. They've been around for a long time. I think what you're seeing is we've always had a lot of, both men and women as fans, but I just think you're seeing the numbers explode. I think it's always been the quantity, right? So I think there's a significant amount of research out there that I would encourage you to look at. And the most recent one, the Wasserman Collective did, that really kind of shows you just what fandom looks like now. But it definitely crosses everyone.
Some past guests have expressed concern about, I don't know, sort of this, I guess, this integration of long-term women's sports fans and this new group of people coming in. Do you have any thoughts about that? And that, I don't know, I feel like some longtime fans are sort of protective that, like, hey, I've been here forever and you newcomers.
I think it's really, really important. And maybe this is one because I can say I'm an old timer at this point. That's why I say, welcome to the women's sports party. There's plenty of room at the table. We need to embrace everyone that wants to be in this space. They are only going to make women's sports even better and stronger. They're only going to show more investment in the areas that we all care about. I had some of the most remarkable, amazing season ticket holders and fans from the Sacramento Monarchs days that, I will always cherish. And for all of us that have cared deeply for women's sports, we want to embrace them, have them be, feel welcome, and recognize that this is just going to make everything that we've cared about that much better. And I think it's also showcases the beauty of what women's sports community has always been, is we've always been inclusive. So let's bring everybody to the table and I think all of us feel strongly about that. I want to see every women's team playing in front of sold out crowds. And I don't care if that's high school, college, professional. They deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah, the play is great. Well, thank you. Do you want to wrap up in any way? Leave us with something?
I would just say this. We need to keep our foot on the gas for women's sports, and everyone plays a role, no matter where you sit, no matter if you've have the ability to influence a young person to play sports. If you played sports, continue your journey in supporting and becoming a fan. But we all play a role, and let's keep our foot on the gas. And then obviously, I would ask them to support us. So it would be great if you could finish with, we need everyone's support at the Women's Sports Foundation to do our work. So we'd really ask people to visit us at womensportsfoundation.org and support our organization.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I just love talking to the people at the Women's Sports Foundation every once in a while to hear updates about their work and their focus. We have come such a long way in women's sports since the very first episode of Hear Her Sports podcast almost 10 years ago, and certainly since the founding of the Women's Sports Foundation more than 50 years ago. Thank you to Danette for joining me and to the Women's Sports Foundation for being a great supporter of this show and for absolutely everything that they do. The show notes are filled with resources about Title IX, supporting Women's Sports Foundation, buying an incredibly cool t-shirt from them, becoming a coach in your community, and so much more. You can find all of that at hearhersports.com. And thank you to our affiliate partner, Do Yoga With Me. If you are looking for yoga you can do at home, Do Yoga With Me is the best that I know. Support Hear Her Sports by joining Do Yoga With Me classes from the support tab on our website at hearhersports.com/support. As I've said before, working with an affiliate partner is difficult as a podcast because you are listening and there's no link to click. So later you go to your phone or your computer and you can just as easily go directly to the Do Yoga With Me website and no one will know you heard about the site right here. But if you would like to support Hear Her Sports podcast and everything that we do, I'd appreciate it if you access the Do Yoga With Me website from Hear Her Sports. There is also a link in the show notes page of this episode. That's it for this week. I will see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.